The idea, though, can be described in one paragraph and will be by short reviews of it. And the idea is that in a town called Chester's Mill in Maine, all of a sudden a dome descends on the town, and then the town becomes a kind of microcosm. But there are many ways you could have done that. The execution of this is particularly interesting because you don't have a paragraph where you sit and explain exactly what has happened, ever. Can you describe the way you start, the way you get across knowledge of the dome? What's the first thing you convey?
Well, the first thing that happens is a woodchuck falls in half. We set up the scene where there are three things going on simultaneously, and this is almost verbatim from the first draft of the book, the first try at the book in 1976. I lost that manuscript. And by the way, I just want to say one thing. I started this in 1976, gave up, tried again in 1979, gave up, finally, broke my brains and wrote this thing in 2 years, and I gave it to my sister-in-law. She said, "Oh, it's like the Simpsons movie." And I'm like that. Don't tell me that, because I never saw the Simpsons movie. If I had, I would have had somebody shout it out, because somebody in town should have seen it. But, so at the beginning of the book, you have a woodchuck that's headed for the landfill. You have a character who's planning to leave town, who's not able to. He's the main character, Dale Barbara, who's the short order cook, and for various reasons that have to do with the story, it seems wise to him to leave town. And the third thing you have is a plane flying overhead where the local pilot is giving a lesson, flying lesson, to the first selectman's wife. And the dome comes down, and the woodchuck falls in half, and the plane crashes into it at the same time, and the poor guy's on the road. He's being doused by body parts and engine parts, and it's a Stephen King moment.
So that's a way of conveying that there's some obstacle that's appeared.
Right.
But that we don't know what it is, we don't know what shape it is, we don't know whether it's porous, we don't know what effects it's going to have. Can you talk a little about some other ways in which you get across some of those details?
Well, one of the things that happens when you've been at the job for a while is that you get smart about readers and what readers will know. And I have a lot less of a tendency to fool myself about how smart readers are and how far they can think ahead. And the trick is to use that for your own dirty purposes when you're writing. So the first thing that you come across is the title of the book is Under the Dome. So you know it's going to be a dome that they're under, but it's really not. It's really not a dome. It's like a three-dimensional sock, because it follows all the borders of the town, which has this vaguely sock-like shape, and it also goes down below the ground, so it's also sort of like a contact capsule.
But how do they find out how high it is?
Well, the Air Force shoots dummy missiles at it. They fly planes toward it, and the missiles bounce off at 25,000 feet and at 35,000 feet, 45,000 feet, and at 47,300 feet, zip right through, so they know that that's the top of it. I wanted it high enough so that weather could develop under there if the story went in that direction, but as it turned out, the time span was shorter than I thought it would be when I started the book. I don't have any particular plan. John Irving is a good acquaintance of mine, and I've been on stage with him before where he'll say, "I always know how a book ends." And I always think, Jesus, why do you want to write a book if you know how it's going to come out?
Did you know what the dome was when you started writing about it?
Not exactly. No. I had some ideas, and I knew, all right, I knew where the ballpark was. I knew the area. And little by little, it's almost as though as the story goes along, there's only one place it can go. I don't know where that is, but the options fall away. It's not like if you start from New York City and you're going to Podunk, Iowa, your choice of roads is infinite to start with. But the closer you get, the less roads there are, until finally there's only one that'll take you there.
Many of your works, including The Mist and Children of the Corn, have a suspicious view of organized religion. Other works, like The Stand, have a very positive view of religion in the form of Mother Abigail. What is your viewpoint on organized religion?
Well, this book is also about organized religion to a degree, and I just hate people who wrap their political ambitions in God and the church and that sort of thing, and say, you ought to do this because it's God's will or because God told me to. I don't just hate it, it gives me the absolute creeps. And it's one of the things that Jim Rennie is a deacon in the local church, and the church has become a meth factory. I don't think that's given away too much. And if there's any,
I wasn't going to mention that.
If there's any symbolism in that, it's that, you know, it just seems to me that Marx was right, that religion is the opiate of the people when it's organized religion. And I see it as most of the problem in the world today is people saying, God told me to do this, whether it's radical Islamists or whether it's the polygamists who are marrying 9-year-old girls. There's a whole gamut that you can run. We just had an election in Maine. I'm ashamed to say this, but there was a referendum to overturn the rights of gay people to engage in civil marriage, and I'm embarrassed to say that referendum passed. It didn't pass by a lot, but the major sponsor in-state, there were a lot of out-of-state money that came in, but the major sponsor in-state was the Catholic Church. And I was raised in a religious environment. I've got a lot of Bible, and I've used a lot of it, and I do believe in God. I believe in some kind of a higher power, which is probably something I picked up to a degree in one of the recovery programs that I'm involved in. But as a kid who grew up with Bible drills and all that, somebody came to Jesus and said, well, if you're the Messiah, then probably you think we shouldn't give taxes to Rome anymore. And Jesus said, the things that are Rome's and render unto God the things that belong to God. And I just wish that when you see the Jerry Falwells and you see the other religious leaders who say, we ought to have a say in politics. No, sorry, you shouldn't. Your job is spiritual. Your job is spiritual guidance. I've always been amazed that the Catholic Church would come out and go into states and say, we want to support legislation that keeps women from choosing to have an abortion if they need to have an abortion. Well, if you don't want to have an abortion, don't have an abortion, for goodness sakes. And if you believe that God thinks that abortion is, you know, some kind of a sin, well, my goodness, don't have one. But don't make it a law that says Susie X over here don't believe what you believe, can't have one. So that's a problem. But God is not a problem. God is a solution, it seems to me, for a lot of people. And certainly, even, and I'm not entirely sure, you know, I could die and get into the afterlife and discover it's run by Rodney Dangerfield, all right? Which would be a shock. Nobody really knows, and in that sense, I'm an agnostic. But I do believe that belief in a higher power increases a person's humanitarian abilities.
While you have all these things going on and all the different factions and organizations in the town, they all work as a kind of distraction from the question of what happened. What is this thing? Who sent it? How did it get here? What's it made of? How do we get rid of it? How did you manage to write such a long book without really making that a central issue?
Well, you know, first of all, I think that there is a solution, and whether readers like it or whether they don't like it, whether they're disappointed or whether they're, you know, pleased by it, it's there because I got a certain amount of feedback on Cell about, that's the novel where the cell phones turn you into zombies. And it's caused by something called the pulse. And nobody, I got all these letters saying, well, what caused it? Who did it? How come this isn't in the book? And it's like, because I don't friggin' care. And in that sense...
Is it like a MacGuffin for you?
It is like a MacGuffin, but even that phrase has been overused to the point where it almost doesn't mean anything. Because with something like the dome, there has to be some kind of a solution. I read a piece, it was actually a review of Under the Dome, where the guy said, usually in a horror novel or a supernatural story, when the explanation comes, it's a letdown because the nightmare is over. There's a rationality sort of reimposes itself. But because people were so unhappy with Sal, I did want to have a definite conclusion for this. But in the course of the ongoing event, I think people live their day-to-day lives, and they care a lot more about where their next meal is coming from, or what's going to happen, or how frightened they are, rather than the actual cause of the thing. And in a larger sense, in a human sense, bad stuff happens to us and we don't know why. We can't explain cancer. We can't explain why those particular people at Fort Hood were killed. We don't know why the guy did it. We may never know why the guy did it. There's a story, I think, in the summer that interested me, a lady driving the wrong way on the Taconic Parkway, and she crashed a car, 7 people were killed, her daughter was killed, 2 or 3 of her nieces were killed. A bottle of vodka was found in the wreckage, and the husband said, but she was always sober, she didn't drink, and that bottle went back and forth with us to camp all the time. And there's a whole story there about why the woman was drinking that day, or if she was. But to me, the mystery is more attractive than the solution, always. I tell you what, I tried this book 3 times, and the first time was in 1976, and I got about 75 pages, and I got daunted by the size of it, so I went on and wrote a book called The Stand, because I guess I was supposed to write a long book at that time, but I did, and I got daunted by the technical aspects of it, because I talked to some meteorologists, and nobody knew what would happen in a situation like that, or how fast pollution would build up. And, then I tried again in 1979. I was on the set of a movie called Creepshow, and they put us up in a hotel in Pittsburgh that was just, well, it wasn't a hotel, it was condos. And I thought, what would happen if people were trapped in this building? It took me right back to Dome again. You can figure out where the book was going because the title was The Cannibals that time. And that didn't work out either.
No one eats anyone else in this book.
Yeah. And finally,
just
no, because it didn't go on long enough, but I'm sure they would have, given time. It's a Stephen King book.
I just want to say about this book, we're going to talk about it in some detail, but we're not going to give away anything about the plot. However, as you've all read Stephen King's books, you know that none of them has ever ended with the line, and then they live happily ever after. Okay? Do you recommend that new writers first gain a formal college education in an area like English or journalism, or would it be equally beneficial, more so, to grow as a writer simply by continuous research, writing, and reading?
Well, I went to college to become a school teacher. I felt that I could become a writer on my own, and my mother, who raised my brother and I, knew that I wanted to be a writer, and she said, well, Stephen, you've got to support yourself in the meantime, and you might want to have a family, so you've got to get a trade that brings in a regular paycheck. And I had no problem with that. I wanted to work and be productive, so I went to college, and I majored in English, but it was in the College of Education, and the goal was always to get a teaching certificate, and I was teaching high school when I was able to support myself. I quit to become a full-time writer, and just before that happened, I was going to go back to college with my wife's support to get a additional 16 or 18 hours so I could teach grammar school, because it just broke my heart that so many of the high school kids were beyond reach. They had made up their minds that they didn't want to read, that they didn't want to take part in that, and I thought, well, you know, it's like the Catholic Church says, get them while they're young, they're ours forever, and I thought maybe I can do that with little kids. But the writing itself goes on its own course. If you do it on a day-by-day basis, you're naturally going to get better at it, and then your ability to be good is only going to be limited by your talent. The problem with teaching and writing at the same time is the teaching steals some of the creative spark from the writing, so that if you're going to do it, it almost makes more sense. You know how you read a book and you look at the author's bio on the back and it'll say he was a dishwasher, he was a dock worker, he was a bouncer in a strip club, and then he was an ad man or whatever. Sometimes that's better.